by blocking a compromise with the House to find compromise. I spoke about this 1 week ago, but the stalemate continues. Today there is an announcement that in my Commonwealth, 90,000 civilian Department of Defense employees and hundreds of thousands of DoD civilians nationally will be furloughed for 11 days between now and the end of the year. This furlough announcement, along with ample other evidence that we discussed in this body in the last few weeks, demonstrates that budgetary gridlock, budgetary indecision, budgetary stalling has real-life consequences. I rise to implore my Senate colleagues to do the right thing and to do the job that the American public has sent us here to do. Madam President, this is about budgets, but it's also about something even bigger than budgets. It's about something fundamental to the entire system of government we have, the willingness to work together to find common ground, to find solutions. I truly view this budgetary stalemate as an attack on compromise. We cannot survive as a Senate or as a Congress or as a nation without finding common ground. Madam President, I know that you, like me, were out on the campaign trail a lot in 2012, and I heard a repeated critique of this body as a body that was unable to produce a budget since 2009. There were some arguments back and forth about whether that was technically accurate, but as I looked at it as a candidate, it was at least clear that a normal budgetary order in accord with the Budget Act of 1974 had not been followed for a number of years. And so as a citizen of the Commonwealth and country, and as a candidate, I said, if I have the opportunity to serve in this body, I'm going to work with my colleagues to make sure that we do the public's business in the way that was contemplated in that statute. Madam President, I didn't ask, but I was assigned to be on the Senate Budget Committee as soon as I got to this body. And I immediately made clear, along with many other members, both newcomers and members who'd been on the committee for a while, and along with the new committee chair, Senator Murray, that this body needed to return to normal budgetary procedures. It seemed like in the past few years Congress had tried a lot of other things, supercommittees and sequesters and continuing resolutions, and none of those alternate methods were working to do the nation's fiscal business. So along with many senators of both parties, I said the right strategy is for us to return to normal budgetary procedure. We can make that work as Congresses in the past have made it work. So I entered the body in January, the 3rd of January, now more than 4 months ago, with a profound belief that we needed to just embrace the normal procedures about doing a budget. Those normal procedures are known to all. People read them in textbooks about how bills become laws. The Senate and House in the spring under normal procedure would each pass a budget. Those budget bills would likely be significantly different. Even when the parties controlling the two houses are the same, the two House budgets are different. There is then some effort to find a compromise between the two differing versions, often through use of a conference committee. And once that compromise is found, then that compromise is sent back to each House for a vote, and it then becomes the guidance that is used by the Appropriations Committee to write the bills appropriating dollars for the next fiscal year. That is the normal process, and it's the way that Congress has operated under both parties, under split houses, for many, many years. Well, Madam President, here's the good news. The Senate Budget Committee embraced this challenge. Chairman Murray worked with staff and members of the committee to create a draft budget, and then in early and mid-March, we had robust committee hearings and a full debate and a full amendment process about a Senate budget. In March, the committee ultimately considered the chairman's mark for 13 hours, and we had a full amendment process voting on over 30 amendments, the majority of which were made by Republican members of the committee. We debated and we voted on those amendments. I sat there. I voted for a number of the Republican amendments to the budget that then became part of the ultimate committee product. Republican members offered numerous amendments, and at one point I remember my colleague from Maine, Senator King, asking in response to an amendment offered by a Republican member, if I vote for your amendment, are you going to vote for this committee budget? And the answer was given in public. The answer was, no, I want you to vote for my amendment, but I'm still going to vote against the budget. And I'm going to vote against it because the House will produce a Republican budget, the Senate will produce a Democratic budget, and then we can get those two budgets together and find compromise going forward. That was what was said when we met as a Budget Committee. At the end of the day, the Senate Budget Committee passed that budget in mid-March, passed it without a single Republican vote, but the budget was passed and it was forwarded to the Senate floor. Now, Madam President, I know you remember this. This is emblazoned upon all of our memories. We then took the budget to the Senate floor in late March. The budget was the subject of floor activity in this body for 39.5 hours. Now, we don't do a lot of things around here for 39.5 hours, but the budget was subject to floor activity and numerous speeches by senators just like me over the course of that week. The entire body then considered and debated and voted on nearly 110 amendments to the budget, passing 77 of the amendments. The amendments that were passed were offered both by Democrats and Republicans. I remember voting for many of the Republican amendments that then became part of the ultimate budget bill. This amendment activity, 110 amendments, 77 passing, is significantly greater than has been the norm in earlier Senate deliberations. And at 5 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, March the 23rd, the Senate passed its first budget in 4 years. Not a single Republican voted to support that budget, even though many of their amendments had been included either in the committee or in the floor amendment process that we had during those hours in late March. Now, Madam President, I've done a lot of budgets as a mayor and as a governor. And like all my colleagues on the Budget Committee, I worked hard on this one in the committee and on the floor, and my staff did too, and so did the Senate Budget Committee staff and the staffers of all the members on that committee. I'm proud that we passed that budget on March the 23rd. And I believe firmly that if that budget were implemented today without changing one apostrophe, comma, or punctuation mark, that it would do a number of things. It would help create jobs, it would help the economy, and it would deal with our debt and deficit in a fiscally responsible way. But, Madam President, I also understood this, that Senate budget that we passed was not the final product. It was the Senate's best effort to find a budget that would move our economy and our country forward. We knew that budget would be placed in a conference with the House budget. The House had passed their budget the same week. We knew that there would have to be discussion and compromise and an effort to find common ground, but we did our best version, and the House, I assume, feels like they did their very best version. Now, the two House budgets are very different. I deeply believe that the Senate budget's superior and that the American people, watching the discussions between the two Houses and comparing them, would reach the same conclusion. But at the very least, I know this, the American public are entitled to see that debate and discussion. They're entitled to look at the House budget and look at the Senate budget and compare them just as the conferees would be comparing. They're entitled to watch that process of dialogue and debate and hopefully compromise. That is, in fact, what they've sent us here to do, and that's what Congresses have done for many, many years and decades. The process of a budget conference would not be an easy one because the two budgets are quite different. But there's no substitute for dialogue and compromise. In fact, I think all of us in this body know that dialogue and compromise at its core are what we are about here. When the framers of our Constitution in Article 1 set up a legislative branch with two houses, a bicameral branch, and required that most items to pass through Congress would have to go through both branches, they understood very well what they were doing. They were creating a system of checks and balances that required dialogue and listening and compromise in order to do the good thing for the benefit of the nation. At our very root, a bicameral legislature existing in a system of checks and balances with a judiciary and an executive branch depends upon public servants who are willing to find common ground. Well, Madam President, since March 23rd, nearly 7 weeks, a small minority of senators, often one at a time, have done all they can to block a budget conference from even beginning and therefore to block compromise. As we've taken steps to begin a budget conference with the House leadership to put these two budgets together and find compromise, again and again, individual senators have stood up on the floor of this body and, in my view, abused the UC rules to block a conference from even beginning. Even as budgetary indecision and sequester are leading to furloughs, they have blocked a conference from even beginning. Even as we are seeing reductions in the number of people who are able to receive Meals on Wheels or children in Head Start, they have abused Senate rules to block a budget conference from even beginning. I serve on the Armed Services Committee. We're working on the Defense Authorization Bill now, and we have the service chiefs come in and talk to us every day about the challenges that they're facing, about the degraded readiness. 1/3 of our Air Combat Command units standing down because of these budgetary challenges. We hear the steady drumbeat day in, day out about degradation in readiness, challenges to our modernization programs. We had a hearing about the Marine Corps this morning, and yet even as we're hearing these in hearings in the morning, in the afternoon, members come to this floor and stand up and try to block a budget conference from even beginning. This is very, very serious. When we're talking about the readiness of our military, who are facing challenges, we don't just pick up today's paper and read headlines about Syria or North Korea or Iran. As we're facing significant challenges, continuing challenges in Afghanistan, to have members of this body block efforts to find compromise is a very chilling thing. Let's be clear about what this is. This is not just an attack on the budget itself, because those who want to attack the budget voted against it in committee. Those who didn't like the budget had a chance and voted against it on the floor. Even in the event that a conference committee would produce a budget compromise, that compromise would come back and those who didn't like that budget would have a chance to vote against it again. That's how you attack a budget. That's how you express disagreement with a budget. You stand on the floor of this body and you vote against it. And the members have had a chance to do that in committee and on the floor, and they'll have a chance to do it again at the end of a conference process. No, the effort that has been underway in this body since March 23rd is not fundamentally an attack on budgets. It is an attack on the whole notion of compromise. To block a conference committee from beginning so that House and Senate conferees could sit down and try to listen to each other and iron out their differences is fundamentally an attack on compromise. And we have seen that too much in this body. Anyone in this room knows that if you are not a hermit, if you are a member of a family, if you're a member of a parish council, if you're on a PTA, if you're part of the organizing group of a little league, if you have a business, if you're an elected office from school board to the United States Senate, everyone knows if you participate in group life, it has to be about compromise. Our founders knew it, and they created a system that relies upon compromise. And what we've seen in this body since March 23rd, after people had a full opportunity to amend and vote on a budget, is not really about a budget. It's an attack upon compromise. I stand here and conclude and say that just as no family can succeed without compromise, just as no community, just as no business, just as no school board, just as no group of people can succeed without compromise, Congress, the Senate, and our nation cannot succeed without a spirit of compromise. And so I implore and ask my colleagues to rethink the path that they are on, to stand down in this attack upon compromise, to allow the budget to go to conference so that we can do the tough work of listening to each other and finding common ground for the good of the American people. Thank you, Madam President. And I yield the floor. Madam President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
So a vote to limit debate on the water infrastructure projects bill has now been moved to 2:30 Eastern. That's following the Senate's break for party lunches at 12:30. While we wait for a senator to speak, more for the Senate markup of the Farm Bill. The Agriculture Committee hearing is also live today on cspan.org.
Evaluating household assets or gross income. Now, the amendment, as the Senator has indicated, would save over $11 billion over 10 years. To be clear, this represents a cut to some of the benefits, but this amount represents the amount of benefits to people who would not otherwise be eligible for these benefits were it not for the states gaming the system. States should not be encouraged or permitted to game the federal nutrition programs. If there's anything unfair about this amendment, is that states have chosen to really milk the taxpayer for SNAP benefits their recipients would not otherwise receive. It's a tough issue. It's a very controversial issue. It's a very emotional issue. But I do thank the Senator for his courage to identify the issue of program integrity, which should really lead to all the recipients and the taxpayer. We really, truly want to help those who truly need it, and we want to be fair to the taxpayer as well. So I would encourage my colleagues to support the Senator's amendment.
Senator Gillibrand. I would like to disagree with my colleagues and support the statements of Senator Cochran, who's exactly right. Categorical eligibility is not about closing a loophole. We put those reforms in place as part of welfare reforms during the 1990s to send more money to the states to make sure they could handle these issues. The reason why we created those programs and that structure was for efficiency. And for members of Congress who are constantly saying there's too much government waste, too much government involvement, too much government protocols, you're arguing the exact opposite right now. You're arguing that you want more paperwork, more people standing in lines, more people filling out forms, when the whole purpose of these efficiencies in the 1990s was just to get resources to the families that need it. If you are on a welfare program, if you are designated an at-risk family by TANF and other programs, it means you are hard-working people who just don't earn enough money to provide for your kids. Or you are a senior who worked your whole life, served our country even, made every sacrifice under the sun, and just don't have enough money to get by. Folks think that our programs cover everything that's needed, but let me just say, more than half the people on Social Security today are below the poverty line. We're talking about keeping seniors out of starving poverty, period. We're talking about rewarding our veterans who have given their lives. If they need food on their table, we're going to make sure it's there. So I know we are so eager to cut spending everywhere we can, but again, this is not the place to balance our budgets. We are a moral country that does not want people to go hungry, and I urge you not to support this amendment. Thank you. Let me just indicate my strong opposition as well. This amendment has been defeated multiple times on the floor of the Senate on a bipartisan basis, including in our consideration last year, and it would eliminate an option that is used by over 40 states. And so I would urge a no vote. Is there anyone further wishing to? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The nays have it. Are there further amendments to the nutrition title? Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The first amendment, this would be Thune number 4. This has to do with the SNAP education program, which is voluntary and requires a state resource match as well as an approved budget and implementation plan. And the discussion about the SNAP program this morning is centered around, cuts to that program and who that might impact. This doesn't impact any beneficiary. This is basically the program that's used to educate people. And if you look at where those dollars go today, you've got some serious inequities in the way that the money is distributed. In fact, it seems a little unfair that 54% of these resources are going to 4 states. Now, just as a case in point, Texas has more SNAP enrollees than California, and it's only receiving 1.3% of these funds, where California gets 31.4%. It doesn't seem like it would take that much more to educate people in California than it does in the state of Texas. This doesn't end the program, which some of the previous proposals have attempted to do, but instead ensures that resources are spent more equitably. And basically what it does is it provides for a $5 per person number that would be allowed for per enrolled individual to be used for education, and that's indexed annually for inflation. So again, I think this is a fairly common sense thing that doesn't impact people who are beneficiaries of this. And by the way, this scores at a $2 billion savings. So if we're looking for areas to find savings in the Farm Bill, and I think with the sequester, as has already been pointed out by my colleague from Nebraska, the savings that have been proposed by the CBO are significantly less because of the sequester. We're down under $20 billion. It strikes me at least that we ought to be able to find some areas in each of the areas of the Farm Bill budget where we can achieve some significant savings. And $4 billion is the number in SNAP, and that's a 10-year number that we find in savings. SNAP will spend over that 10 years $760 billion. So we're talking about 0.5% of the SNAP budget that we were able to find in savings. This adds a couple $2 billion to the savings that we could get out of the SNAP program simply by coming up with a more equitable way of distributing these education and obesity prevention grant dollars. Again, we've got 4 states that get more than half of the funding. It's an inequitable use of funds. It should be spent equally among program participants. My amendment simply restructures these grants so the states can receive $5 per enrolled individual indexed for inflation. And in this way, all recipients of SNAP benefits have equal access to nutrition, education, and obesity prevention resources that help them to make healthy choices when they're shopping on a budget. $2 billion we can get in savings, I would say, Madam Chair, and again, in a way that I think makes sense, is logical, and allows us to continue to do what we need to do to educate people about this program, just does it in a more equitable way. So, Madam President, I would ask for a recorded vote on this amendment.
Senator Johanns.
Madam Chair, thank you. Let me thank the senator from South Dakota for bringing this amendment up. This is another example of the inequities in the SNAP program, and this is an opportunity through this amendment to fix it. 4 states get 50% of the benefit of this. I can't imagine that there was ever a thought by any member that literally this program would be designed in such a way that we'd be on the floor of the Senate saying to 46 states, you're going to be treated unequally, and saying to 4 states, you're going to get a better deal here. I just can't imagine that was the case. This one is important. If you vote to support this amendment, I can almost guarantee you, unless you're a member of those 4 states, you are voting to benefit your state and the program dollars that will come as a result of this amendment to your state. This is a common sense amendment. Again, it's not directed at beneficiaries, and it is a fair way of allocating very precious dollars in a fair way to all 50 states instead of allocating 50% of the money to just 4 states.
Senator Gillibrand. I strongly oppose this amendment on a few grounds. First of all, the straight-up cut of $2 billion in anti-obesity programs is a mistake, because at the end of the day, we are spending $100 billion a year on obesity and $500 billion a year on cardiovascular and heart disease. And unfortunately, we have a growing childhood obesity problem in this country. And when our kids go to school obese, one of the challenges is often they do not sleep well, they have sleep apnea, they often score lower on math and reading because of lack of sleep or because of lack of self-esteem, because they're made fun of. There are so many problems with what happens to children when they are obese. So taking away the money for education with that flat-out cut is just, again, you should be investing in childhood obesity prevention, because if you are an obese child, the likelihood of you becoming obese adult is high. So we want to cut costs through prevention so we don't have to be spending another $100 billion a year on obesity programs for new obese adults. Second reason I oppose this cut. What you're saying is you were in favor of state rights until you don't think the states are doing a good enough job applying for money. Because honestly, just because some states think this is an important program and apply for the money and utilize the money and get it out into their schools doesn't mean you should then defend states that don't think it's important. One of the reasons why Texas only gets 1.3% of the money is not because Texas doesn't have huge need. It's because the government chooses not to apply for this money, chooses not to utilize this money. It's a choice of the Texas governor. It's a choice of the Texas government. If they don't believe this is important to prevent, that's their choice, which I strongly disagree with. It's a long-term savings measure for cost. So I think rewarding states that aren't doing a good job in preventing obesity is the wrong approach, and cutting the program overall is the wrong approach.
Senator Roberts.
Well, I think we all understand that we have an obesity problem in the United States. And I understand the federal government is wanting to play an increasing role, even limiting in regards to school breakfast, school lunch programs to a certain amount of calories. I didn't think I'd ever see the day when the federal government would be deciding how many calories that we would consume. On the obesity problems, I think we all ought to really focus on that, but in a way that makes sense. Are we saying that with 4 states receiving, I have 54%, somebody has said 50%, I think it's 54% of the funding. What about states' rights and the children who suffer from obesity in the 33 state agencies each that receive less than 1% of the total funding? I think what the Senator is trying to do is simply replace the current indexed block grants with a per capita payment of $5 per enrolled household indexed for inflation. This spreads it out more evenly rather than the 4 states.
Dispense to it. Without objection. Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15.
So senators have recessed for their weekly party lunch meetings. The Senate continued work today on a bill authorizing dozens of various federal water, coastal, and environmental projects. Also awaiting action this week, votes on President Obama's picks to head the Energy Department and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Live coverage when senators return at 2:15 Eastern here on C-SPAN 2. The Senate Agriculture Committee began consideration today of amendments to what's called the Farm Bill. It sets national agriculture, nutrition, conservation, and forestry policy. Michigan Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow chairs the committee as it goes through the bill and makes changes before sending it to the full Senate. We join that live now.
Find a way to save $2 billion, an additional $2 billion in this Farm Bill that we could pass on as savings to the